Book TV attends hundreds of author events every year. Here's a preview of a recent event where Jared Diamond discussed how the United States could learn from the past successes and failures of other nations.
I developed my books by teaching the material at UCLA to my UCLA undergraduates year after year until the book is ready for publication. The material of this book I first taught to my UCLA undergraduates in 2013, and I've taught it each year since then. And the story that I'm about to tell you now is the one that my UCLA undergraduates and I find most upsetting as a national political crisis, because the parallels to the United States are so obvious. I lived in Chile, the Latin American country of Chile, in 1967. At that time, Chile is the Latin American country with the longest history of uninterrupted democracy. And when I went to Chile in 1967 and my Chilean friends explained their country to the visiting American, the thing they said was, "We Chileans, we're not like those other Latin American countries. We are a democracy. We have an uninterrupted history of democracy for the last 150 years. We know how to govern ourselves." That was the sentence. We know how to govern ourselves. This was 1967 in Chile, but Chile was also, at that time, spiraling into a breakdown of political compromise. Does that suggest to you anything about the United States today? Breakdown of political compromise. In 1967, none of my Chilean friends foresaw how it would play out. In 1970, Chile democratically elected a President, Salvador Allende, who had been a great minister of public health, but who adopted disastrous economic and foreign policies. He tried to change Chile too fast, even though he had only won by a plurality and 2/3 of Chileans voted against him. And so it was not a surprise to Chileans that there was a coup d'etat that overthrew Allende in 1973 by the Chilean armed forces under General Augusto Pinochet. What shocked Chileans was that the military government remained in power not for a couple of months, but for 17 years and smashed world records for sadism and torture. Pinochet did get the Chilean economy on track by taking as a model the free market policies of Milton Friedman, or what he perceived of those policies, at the University of Chicago. Pinochet eventually miscalculated and was voted out of office in 1989, and democratic government returned to Chile. But the Chilean socialists, when they came back into power in Chile democratically, those socialists, 100,000 of them, those who had not been killed, many of them had been living in Western Europe, where they saw socialism operating differently, in contrast to the breakdown of political compromise and the intransigence of Chilean socialists in the 1960s. Chilean socialists living abroad had watched socialists operate in Western European countries, and they saw that socialists could achieve a lot of their goals by not being intransigent, but by compromising with those of different views, while the Chilean socialists also saw socialists and communists in Eastern European countries plunge those countries into disaster. So the socialists had learned, and Chile today is once again the most democratic country in Latin America. This story of Chile illustrates parallels between personal crises and national crises. Chile underwent selective change. Under Pinochet, Chile changed some things. It adopted a military government. It changed its economic policies, but Chile remained a Catholic, relatively homogeneous country without any change in its borders. When the socialists came back into power, there was again a selective change. The socialists reintroduced democracy. They reintroduced liberal social policies, but they retained, in fact, they increased the military government's free market policies. This illustrates then the importance of flexibility, which you will know from your own experience is important in dealing with personal crises. National flexibility is important in dealing with national crises. Chile illustrates the importance of a model, the model of a free market economy for pointing to Chile a way out of its economic difficulties. Chile illustrates help and lack of help that you all know from personal crises. In this case, help from allies or lack of help from allies. Allende was undermined by the withdrawal of American economic help, and Pinochet was bolstered by the return of American economic help. And then Chile also illustrates the importance of a strong national identity in getting through a national crisis. When the first socialist president came back into office after Pinochet, Aylwin, in his inaugural address, Chileans who had suffered under Pinochet were hoping to hear how he was going to take revenge on the people who had, the government that had killed and tortured so many Chileans. But Aylwin, in his first presidential address, said that his goal was to build a Chile for all Chileans. A Chile for all Chileans. And what that meant was that in the election that had turned Pinochet out of power, even though it was a democratic election, 45% of Chileans had still voted for the military government. And Aylwin recognized that the socialists were going to have to compromise with the military government. A Chile for all Chileans meant a Chile in which the tortured and the relatives of those killed and tortured would have to live together with the torturers. And what made that possible is Chile's strong national identity, a national identity in which there has not been a taking of revenge as there was after the Finnish and Spanish civil wars. That's one of my case studies, one of the things that I experienced, one of the national political crises that I experienced. And by now, you may have been, or you should have been, getting uncomfortable, because what happened in Chile was a breakdown in political compromise, resulting in an end of democracy. Chile illustrates why we study history. It happens in other places. It's happening today. What we're experiencing in the United States today is a breakdown of political compromise that has been setting in. It's usually dated to the 1990s. The breakdown of political compromise, you know all the signs. Recent Congresses have passed fewer laws than any Congress in modern American history, because Congress can't agree, can't reach compromises on passing laws. You've seen the non-compromise of federal and state executives with their legislatures, such as is going on now in the United States. You've seen the breakdown of compromise between federal government and state governments. My state of California is involved in so many lawsuits against the federal government. The federal government is involved in so many lawsuits against the state of California. You've seen the breakdown of compromise between legislatures and the judiciary, the gradual loss of independence of the judiciary. Recently, the legislature of the state of West Virginia impeached all of the Supreme Court justices of the state of West Virginia. So the breakdown of the decline of political compromise, I see as the most serious problem now threatening the United States, because democracy is a great form of government, but democracy involves compromise. And if there's not compromise, then it's not a democracy.
To watch the rest of Jared Diamond's talk about his new book, Upheaval, visit our website, booktv.org, and type the author's name in the search bar at the top of the page.